if anything, the market didn't realize how obvious like some of these tanking situations were, right? Like, I was looking back on my notes and there was a game where like, I think it was the Blazers in tank mode and the Thunder, who were not the current Thunder, but were pretty good in 22, 23, right? And I think, I don't usually bet in game, but I think it was like the Blazers were up one at halftime. I think it was in OKC, and it was like minus 575 for the Thunder. I'm like, they're just going to win, right? I don't like taking a bet with such short odds, but like, they're going to win. The Blazers don't want to win this game. The Thunder do. They're at home. They're going to win like almost deterministically. So I bet on like that, for example.
All right, I want to welcome on a first-time guest, someone who's been an awesome mentor to me in the business, someone who's been an inspiration to me, and also happens to know just a little bit about risk and sports betting. Nate Silver of now the Silver Bulletin. How you doing, man?
Good, man. Long-time listener, first-time guest. I'm trying to figure out if we were on at some point before, but yeah, I guess I'm a virgin for the show.
All right. Well, if I ever get off my ass and restart my food podcast, that's what I actually really need your takes on. But you wrote a great piece for Silver Bulletin over the weekend about this NBA betting scandal, and this has just been such major international news. You noted it was the New York Times main headline. Obviously, Cash Patel did a press conference about it. How much should the average NBA fan really care about this? How much does it affect them if you're just Joe Blow consumer of the NBA?
So one big theme for me is that the problems cited in this indictment, while they implicate gambling, also square with problems that you and I might complain about in the league overall. The constant questions about player availability, the questions about player effort. I don't want to put like what Terry Rozier allegedly did on a spectrum with, a low effort game in March or something like that. But look, I recently designed an NFL model, and the NFL presents different challenges than the NBA. In the NFL, there's not really very much tanking. There's not that much doubt about who's going to play from week to
there
week.
Should be
right?
more. There
should be more, yeah. But I think the ethos of sport is you have 17 games. Guys have careers that last a median of 2.5 years. It's a warrior mentality. And like, look, the conversation about should the league season be shortened from 82 games, I've been kind of a holdout on that to some extent. I maybe am more sympathetic now. But yeah, and look, I think these things have a cumulative effect. I mean, it's been a very fun NBA season so far. We had a great first week, I think. The competitive balance in the league, it's kind of a loaded term, but it's a really fun year. I think it kind of has a cumulative effect over time. We've seen a lot of things. We saw the Tim Donaghy scandal kind of get forgotten about. And in general, people have short memories. This is true in my other field, politics too. A scandal doesn't resonate the way that it did before, but there's still like a cumulative effect on trust and integrity in the league. There's a cumulative effect on also public opinion about sports betting, which are important league partners now. And I don't know, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, not necessarily going to advocate for or against him, but he had a tweet the other day about, hey, Major League Baseball has never recovered from the 1994 strike, which I think is mostly bullshit. However, still, if you look at I think the average per game attendance, I think actually was highest before the strike, right? Stadiums are smaller. There are a lot of confounding variables, but this kind of plays into, I think, a lot of casual fans' worst fears about the league. The league has a very good PR office. They're good at kind of bearing the headline. This is coming, by the way, on top of the Clippers scandal, which I find kind of more humorous, frankly, right? Not that it wasn't serious. But yeah, I think people in almost all walks of life, they forget about the long term, right? Think about in the short term, what can I do to spin this story? What can I do to make people forget about the story? And having a great league with great players goes a long way toward doing that. But this gets to problems that have been extant in the league for a long time. And the theme here is, I don't know if you'd call Adam Silver's push into sports gambling a short-term money grab. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. But in terms of long-term competitive integrity, there are a lot of things, right? As kind of a Knicks fan, I was bothered at the end of the 2022-23 season when the Dallas Mavericks would have had to give up their, I think, number 12 pick, whatever, the Knicks, if they didn't finish in the bottom 11 or whatever it was, like blatantly tanked. There was a game where Luka was in Chicago, which has a big Eastern European, Serbian, Slovakian population, and they played him like one quarter, which didn't make any sense, right? They were saying that, okay, well, he's healthy enough to play, but he's not going to because we're tanking, and they were pretty explicit about that. And the league fined the Mavericks $750,000, which is a cup of coffee to Mark Cuban, basically. I don't think protocols about. I mean, if you're betting, you notice these things with more of a fine-toothed comb. And I did bet the league the year a lot of these things happened in 2022, 23 is kind of an experiment for my book. But everybody knows that like what's written on league injury reports doesn't match what a knowledgeable fan would know about who's going to play that night. Maybe a casual.
That's half my show is pointing out the bullshit that's on these reports.
Absolutely. Right. And again, if you are betting, then that stuff's very material. Maybe you have a model and the model is sharp to the extent that it says, okay, this team, I don't know, the Lakers are 1.5 worse than the public thinks. That would be a pretty big edge. But whether LeBron or Luka or Anthony Davis plays is a shift of 5 or 6 or 7 points, right? It's a mechanical way to think about it. If you're a fan and you bought tickets to, what's it called? Crypto Arena or whatever, not Staples Center anymore. If you're a fan and you bought tickets for that night, right? And maybe I could tell you, yeah, it's the second end of a back-to-back and LeBron rarely plays these and he's listed as questionable, but I would give it 85% chance that he doesn't play. You or I might know that, Nate, but like a casual fan might not. And then the effort level thing. I mean, I think, notice this too when you're betting, but also very evident as a fan. I mean, I thought the playoffs were terrific for the most part last year, but you saw what kind of sport the modern NBA can be when there's high effort level. I understand you're not going to have that sustainable for 82 games a year, maybe not even 66 games a year or whatever else, but maybe a good third of the schedule is compromised by teams that aren't really trying to win or are indifferent toward winning. And I don't think that's as true for other sports.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. I mean, I think you make an interesting point that this dovetails with some of the issues that they're already having. And in fact, that's not only does it kind of send the message that these games don't matter that much, and they objectively do not, or they do matter in the sense that you really want the team to lose, not to win. But then you also just even the players or the coach, the way it mattered to them was that they might be able to get paid instead of actually trying to win the game or trying their best or whatever. And so that all kind of comes together and can be this rising tide that tells fans that no, actually, like a lot of these games don't matter. And unfortunately, in fact, they do not. How much do you care about this? Because we go back to, all the old scandals. The reason the sports leagues didn't want to be in bed with the gamblers initially was you had all these scandals of point shaving, which we haven't seen point shaving yet. That was like the big thing, that you're just intentionally trying to lose games. Ethan Strauss made the point yesterday on his show that Chauncey Billups, once you've told the gamblers that you're not playing your guys, he also is probably going to try to lose the game as well, even though they're not playing his guys, which is, that's concerning. How much do you care? How much do you hear this scandal and be like, oh yeah, the NBA is just like your average NBA game on a Tuesday is not on the up and up? Because that's the existential risk here.
Yeah, look, I don't want to pretend that I have a normal relationship with the league. I mean, I build models around the NBA, at points in time. I bet the NBA, I cover the NBA for our newsletter. For the newsletter, it might be fine because you're not doing gamers, right? You're doing like narrative type stories. And so that might not affect things as much. And I'm a fan. I mean, I watch a ton of playoffs. I go to, I don't know, 10 or 12 Knicks games during the regular season. I love the league, but my perspective is jaded by the fact that I'm trying to build predictive models, and this creates challenges for predictive models in that, like, it's not just the injury thing. I mean, you could build an algorithm and say, okay, LeBron James, when he's listed as questionable and second end of a back-to-back, only plays 10% of the time, right? Like that part you can do. The effort level is very difficult, where like playoff basketball and regular season basketball are not that synonymous with one another necessarily, right? It's been a perpetual challenge for systems like Raptor, where you kind of optimize them for the regular season and they kind of suck in the playoffs, or maybe vice versa to some extent. And that's because, the effort level varies from game to game in a way that it doesn't so much for other sports. I mean, there are exceptions. If you look at in week 18 of the NFL season, for some reason, the equilibrium there is like in week 18, if you've clinched the playoffs, or maybe if you're trying to jockey for draft position in that last week, then you can kind of tank, right? And we've analyzed this and you see pretty big effects, right? It's like a 4-point effect, which is huge relative to the point spread if you're playing in week 18 and you have nothing to play for, right? We haven't tried to optimize that for the NBA yet, but yeah, so much of what you're figuring out, if you are being precise enough to try to bet on the games, is like, what is this team's incentive tonight, right? What is the effort level likely to be? Of course, the betting market has opinions about that. The year I bet the league, which is again 22-23, which is named frequently in the indictment, if anything, the market didn't realize how obvious like some of these tanking situations were, right? Like, I was looking back on my notes and there was a game where like I think it was the Blazers in tank mode and the Thunder, who were not the current Thunder, but were pretty good in 22-23, right? And I think, I don't usually bet in game, but I think it was like the Blazers were up 1 at halftime. I think it was in OKC, and it was like minus 575 for the Thunder. I'm like, they're just going to win, right? I don't like taking a bet with such short odds, but like, they're going to win. The Blazers don't want to win this game. The Thunder do. They're at home. They're going to win like almost deterministically. So I bet on like that, for example, and like that kind of thing.
They were playing this point guard named John Butler, who was like 6'10", and spoiler alert, did not figure in an NBA rotation after that year.
No, there are creative ways you can do it, right? Like the year the Spurs played Jeremy Sohan at like point guard and things like that. Like that was kind of creative, and you can argue for that from like a player development point of view. I do think that like the Terry Rozier types are unusual. The vast majority of players are giving fairly high effort, right? With the exception maybe of, I'm not saying that like the veteran superstars don't give high effort. I think they figured out that like they optimize their effort by taking some possessions off on defense, which I don't blame LeBron for or anybody else, right? You notice sometimes people are like, how do the big box score points, rebounds, assists, how do they stay so consistent for these superstars to age 35, 36, 37? If you look at their on-off numbers and isolate defense, you see that like they become, even if they're great athletes and great defenders in a half-court clutch scenario, right? The effort level on defense goes down quite a bit. Again, that's, I think, smart, right? You generally produce more marginal value on offense if you're a superstar player. So they're pacing themselves. But yeah, I mean, look, the smart thing to do, one thing you and I both know is like rookies are generally terrible in the NBA. The sport has a difficult learning curve. And so playing a team full of rookies like the Nets are this year or something is a good way to kind of legitimately tank. But yeah, it's hard. And the teams know this. And so therefore, like, mention the indictment, like, why are the Orlando Magic a young team? Why does every starter on the team get like injured or rested in like the last game or next to last game of the season? You don't really need to rest for anything more. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there are ways for the league to kind of say, okay, you're allowed to tank on certain days. You just have to be honest about it, right? Or I thought one idea I've had before is if you want to keep the 82 game schedule, maybe you mandate that every player has 3 or 5 scheduled days off, and you have to like schedule these like a week in advance or something. So if you're buying tickets, you know that Luka's not playing that night, or LeBron's not playing, or whatever else. But like it's the lack of transparency that I think is pretty frustrating, including allegedly. I mean, the fact that like, Brian Windhorst alleged, and the league of course denied that, like, okay, that there was kind of a quasi investigation, paid suspension for Rozier late, I guess, in 2023. And he was listed as having like a foot injury on the injury reports. And I don't get the sense that anybody actually like cares why a guy is listed as out. Whereas if you're betting, it matters, right? Or even playing like fantasy basketball, it's like, okay, a personal day versus an acute injury versus a long-term injury versus a flu versus rest. Those all have different implications for whether a guy will play the next day, the next week, etc.
So, can I give you my proposed fix for this? Because I
Of
think
course.
one of the big things you mentioned it on the injury reports or the teams may be tanking, that leads to there being non-public information that's going to
Yeah.
affect the betting line. And when you have the more non-public information that might affect the betting line that there is, the more incentive there is for someone to obtain that information and try to profit. Now, the other, we can talk about whether they actually can profit and how on it the sports books are. That could be another topic. But to me, you fix the injury reporting and maybe you also fix the tanking incentive as well. But with respect to injury reporting, I think a lot of this goes away because, again, we're not talking about point spread stuff. We're talking about individual player props. All right, you can limit that, especially with guys who are not, big stars necessarily. Like I think that could work pretty well. To me, though, it's the injury reporting. So this is my proposed fix. I want to get your thoughts on this. All injury reporting should be done by the league. And you have league personnel who this is their only job. They are privy to all inside medical information on the team, probably would have to be collectively bargained. And those guys, then, there's a Chinese wall between them and the rest of the league. That's like a term I learned in law school, basically, where within an organization, you set things up where one side, basically one hand doesn't know what the other is doing. So that information doesn't get exposed to the rest of the league personnel. And then they decide, are we going to list this guy question? Are we going to list this guy probable? Are we listing him as out? And you go through that analysis basically on a continuous basis. And the moment a guy might be questionable or he might be out, the league is now responsible for doing that, not the teams, because there's so much incentive to obfuscate that. Oh, we're going to call it shoulder soreness, so it doesn't mess up this guy's future earnings that he's injury prone, that kind of shit. So, what do you think of that as a possible solution?
I like it. And look, it's a very rich league, so you could hire 30 fairly adept and talented people, or even, two people per team or something to have some redundancy. Look, I'm sure at first that the players would regard this person or these people as like kind of super annoying hall monitor HR types of people. At the same time, sometimes you're in a kind of prisoner's dilemma where if one team thinks, right, like, okay, well, unless I fudge or look, I don't know. I mean, look at the NBA general managers, executives I know are unsurprisingly extremely competitive people who think about every little teeny edge, right? A quarter of a point or a tenth of a point, or you go from a 52.1% chance of winning 52.2%. Gamblers are kind of the same way, by the way. So if they're in some ways kind of having it be out of their hands, I don't think they feel this way at first, might be a welcome development in the long run, right? And within the league, right? I mean, one reason why organizations hire consultants is to like defray responsibility, where that way they can say, look, I didn't think LeBron was questionable, but like that's what the injury HR rep told me to put there, and so I had to. And so I think that would be a good proposal. Yeah, and I'm sure you'd have like disputes, and it might not be standard. I mean, there might be some analogy. Does the league hire official scorers or teams do? Right, like there is
No,
bias.
the
And
league
like,
hires them. The league hires them.
yeah, I don't know if there's still bias in like Chris Paul or John Stockton getting credit with too many assists, but yeah, that should be a function. And you have analogies where I'm not a draft Nick, but in a lot of sports, you have like common scouting services or kind of common injury reporting protocols, right? You don't want to have 30 or 32 teams playing in the league, have independent doctors examine every draft pick. And so it should be kind of thought of as like a shared service for the integrity of the league, including sports betting. If the league is officially partnered with all these companies, and that is a matter of of league financial integrity as well as competitive integrity, I'm two thumbs up for that proposal, Nate.
Awesome. All right, I love it. So this is another question that I have for you. You've spent a lot of time around it, as you like to call them, degens, people who just love to bet a lot, who are just crazy, really competitive people, and NBA players are really competitive people as well. If you look at someone like Chauncey Billups, is what some of the stuff that he's alleged even to have done in the poker world, and then also Terry Rozier, you have any reason why they would do this? People who just have so much right now. Rozier, that's reported that there was a $7 million tax lien on his home. Maybe he had some other financial trouble. There's no indication of that with Billups at all. He was a Hall of Famer and still getting paid $5 million a year by Portland. What do you think is going through these guys' heads, right? Like Jonte Porter, he's making nothing, right? I understand that one.
Right. Yeah.
But these guys who should basically be set for life, still doing this to, Terry Rozier's made $100,000 off of this. Like, what is their motivation?
For Chauncey Billups, they allegedly won or stole, however you want to phrase it, more than at least $7 million off of unsuspecting idiots who, missed all the flashing red lights that this game was being rigged in every possible way, pretty much.
The literal flashing red light on whatever electronic device was being used.
I have a few answers to that. One kind of meta answer is I'm of the view in general that people who have genius level talent in some domain, and relative to the world's population, Terry Rozier has genius level talent in the NBA. Even, for example, I think often the good comes with the bad, and they can be kind of flawed geniuses, if you will. And it's also abetted by the fact that they endure or encounter a lot of privilege in life as you become more successful. Kind of people are kowtowing around you a little bit, right? Like I think you have to be pretty smart to be a good NBA player, but you might not be smart in terms of like financial responsibility. I think in some cases you have probably players with gambling problems, probably players who are investing in their friends' businesses. I mean, NFL players in particular notoriously are very bad at financial well-being. In the long run, it's a shorter career, lower salaries than the NBA, at least for kind of the rank and file players, right? Some of them might be falling in with the wrong crowd. Some of them might think that it's easy money, that it's a no-lose situation. People are very susceptible to that kind of thing. And yeah, you might have some like actual degeneracy where they're in a world where, I mean, this is kind of like the Ipe Mazuhira, who is Shohei Ohtani's interpreter, who did alleged to do all types of stuff. He was just kind of a degen sports bettor. And I think the bookies was saying, okay, well, you have a client who has extremely valuable information potentially, right? And so, it's such a struggle to bet, and you have to win 52.5% of your bets to beat the VIG, to beat the hold that the house takes, right? And so like it's such a struggle to win 53% instead of 52%. If you can have bets where you can win, in the case of a player prop, almost 100%, not that much for a team, but probably pretty high, right? And the same in poker. I mean, it's such a struggle. People think that like, oh, if you're a good poker player, you win all the time. Not really, right? You're still just breaking a little better than break even. I mean, these big lucrative, a good juicy home game can be more lucrative, but still you're going to have plenty of losing nights, right? And I can imagine somebody like Billups enjoys poker because he's a smart, competitive guy who has access to interesting people, right? And then the people running the game are like, you know what, maybe there's a little way to make this a little bit easier for you. I mean, typically my podcast co-host Maria Konnikova did a book on con artists, and kind of what she found is that typically it starts out being something not innocent, but something minor, right? You decide to cheat on something small, you get away with it. And then you're like, okay, well, there's no more kind of sharp dividing line here. And so why not, right? Why not go full bore? I mean, to some extent, cheaters, like in poker in particular, at least ones we catch, which is an important proviso, are dumb because they get very greedy, right? They make it so obvious that they're cheating that that they that it becomes obvious to everybody else. I mean, one thing here, we don't know what kind of the base rate for this is, right? We don't know if this kind of thing is common.
That was going to be my next question of just like, is this the tip of the iceberg, or are they actually like catching everyone, as they like to say, oh, now it's all legal, it's above board, we have the algorithms, we can catch these guys.
Look, this is just going off of priors, right? I would be surprised if there are that many players, and I know there have been one or two now who have been alleged or discovered, right? You also have in baseball players who are alleged to do things like throw a ball on the first pitch, and I think it's slightly ridiculous, all the things that you can bet on, right? Like I'd be surprised if there are all that many players and certainly all that many coaches, right? I would wonder a little bit more about kind of who was it? Damian Jones was kind of the quasi Lakers consigliere coach. Damon Jones, excuse me. Friend consigliere to LeBron James, like that nexus of people, I would wonder about, for example, right? There are a lot of people that know a lot of things about the league. This includes, by the way, like journalists and reporters, or it includes things like look, I mean, I have a friend who I think I can say this without pissing him off too much, right? But like, I have a friend who used to bet a lot of like tennis, for example, and just kind of hanging out in tennis circles, nothing untoward, nothing illegal, right? But just like cultivating relationships in that world can give you a lot of like valuable insight potentially, right? And so this kind of, maybe teams need to tighten up, for example, like who is invited to these practices and things like that, and who's kind of in like a circle of knowledge, right? When I talk to team personnel, they're actually often pretty careful, but I think that varies a lot from person to person, right? As a journalist in general, which is kind of maybe not the hat I wear that often, but I can kind of, I worked at the New York Times and kind of call myself a journalist, sort of, right? As a journalist, one thing you learn is that people have loose lips. People are bad at keeping secrets. People like to
love to talk. It's unbelievable. I mean, like there's some people who keep it close to the vest, but it's amazing to me how many people will just like, on teams just like start like shitting on their own players to me and stuff like that. And it's like, dude, this is like the first conversation we've ever had. You really like they want to get it off their chest so badly. It seems to be just a part of the human condition, I suppose.
Yeah, and people hate to keep secrets in particular, right? And you want to vent to people. I can go on Twitter and get people mad at me on Twitter, but I can I have no boss really, so I can do those kinds of things. But if you're frustrated by a situation, you have lots of incentives to talk. It's a kind of very human response. So part of what I'm saying is like we should need to allow people or require people, create a regime where people are able to be more honest about this kind of thing, right? Again, I don't know, again, as a Knicks fan, it bothered me that like you have a team that's tanking so severely in the league and they're obviously in kind of saying they're tanking the Dallas Mavericks again in 22-23, and there's nothing really done about it. I mean, I'm not even saying like the players are irrational necessarily, right? I don't want to detour too much into like the Steve Ballmer kind of Clippers scandal, right? But you've seen him defended by people like Mark Cuban saying, okay, well, Steve Ballmer is like too smart to do something like that.
I love this.
Yeah.
I love this ridiculous defense. I mean, you talk about like your stuff with SBF for On the Edge. It was great. Like, where it's just like, oh yeah, no, he's too smart to do this. He's too rich. He would never just. What a load of bullshit that is. It's so we've seen this from time and time again in these scandals.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, these billionaires become, walled in their kind of castle, so to speak, and often lack perspective. Also, if the risk of detection is low, I mean, for this Clippers scandal to be outed, I mean, I believe it took kind of aspiration blowing up. So you have a lot of publicly available documents, right? If you think the risk of detection is low, right? Like if Steve Ballmer, to whom the money doesn't matter, thought there's a 10% chance of this being detected eventually, and if it is detected, then I don't know what the current convention of wisdom has evolved on that scandal.
I would guess he thought there was a 1% chance of getting
detected. But even a 10% chance isn't so bad. I mean, you're already mortgaging the future of the franchise for these somewhat long shot parlays.
If this was the tipping point in getting Kawhi to sign, then 10% chance you would want to do it.
And likewise, I think most, I mean, you might have a legal background and know, I think most deterrence theorists just that it's the likelihood of detection and not the severity of the punishment that tends to deter quote unquote crime more.
Yeah.
And so, like, if the league is seen, and the league doesn't really have an incentive to publicize this stuff, if the league has an incentive to turn a blind eye until its hand is forced, then maybe you can figure you can get away with it. I mean, look, again, with the player props, I mean, those are the guys where I'm questioning their intelligence about this matter at least a little bit more, because like it should be fairly obvious that
Yeah.
if there's hundreds of thousands of dollars in action on Terry Rozier or Jonte Porter, that that's unusual. It's like not a casual fan bet. I mean, look, even the sports books, if I'm limited by many of the sports books, which means they restrict how much I can bet. Like even little things like if you bet $2,000 the moment the line comes out on the Hornets Wizards game, a casual fan doesn't do that, and that's a point spread. It's a more robust line,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. If you want to look like a casual, stay out of the Southeast Division. That's my advice.
Don't
That's
don't
my
bet the
advice
Southeast.
to you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, so I guess the other thing that I really wanted to get your take on is some of the amount of pearl clutching of, well, this is what happens when the leagues get into bed with these gambling companies, and it's everywhere, and that's why the players are doing this now, and so this is why we've seen an explosion in these scandals, and this is just going to keep happening. Now, what do you make of those types of arguments?
Look, there's a lot of preciousness around gambling, I'd say, and puritanism. And gambling has been part of the, I don't know if you call it the fabric of sports, but like a part of sports, almost in sports, were invented pretty much, right? When I was a kid and there were still physical newspapers, I'm getting old, I guess, right? They would have like the Vegas lines printed along with the box scores, right? It's like not like, and if you got rid of like DraftKings, FanDuel, Caesars, whatever, not all the action, but some, probably greater than 50% of the action would move to gray market sites. It's very hard to regulate potentially with crypto. At the same time, look, I have used a line sometimes where there's a line about like abortion, about like abortion should be kind of like safe, legal, and rare. Democrats don't necessarily like that line if they're more progressive
Mm-hmm.
now, but it's like a Bill Clinton line, I think, right? Yeah, I kind of think like sports gambling should be safe, legal, and rare, right? If you bet, you should know they're going to get paid out. You should know that like it's a legitimate enterprise running it. I think it should be legal. I mean, there's some tax revenue made from it, but more that like you create more problems if it's offshore and occurring anyway. It's hard to detect. But rare, I don't think it's like a fantastic development for society to have people kind of like betting on games. And again, my point of view is like it's very jaded, and that like I am like the rare person. Like I treat sports betting as half a hobby and kind of half a way to kind of test and refine my models, right? I have made, I don't know, over the past couple of years, my ROI is probably plus 1.5% or something, which is probably not necessarily distinguishable from zero given the sample size that I have. But like, for me, it's this kind of fun thing where I probably make a little bit of money and get to test out model strategies. That's a very unusual thing, right? The very large majority of bettors, 99%, don't have much hope of winning, and it can be predatory, right? I've been in like suites with friends who are more degenerate bettors, I guess, than I am, right? Suites with some of the big gambling companies, and like, yeah, it's a little weird where like people are at the Rangers game or the Knicks game and everyone's on their phone, like trying to make bets in real time. I'm not sure it's fantastic for like anything in the league. And I think, to me, the problem is that like maybe you want to like slow walk the approach a little bit more, right? Say we are going to kind of test out. We're going to have these sports books allow certain bets, but we're not going to let you bet on Jonte Porter over under turnovers or something like that, right? We're going to be discreet about the amount of advertising that we allow, right? I mean, basically, the problem is like anything that you can do that would be like a reasonable regulation would reduce the profitability of the sports books, right? There's no magic wand you can wave where we have the quote unquote like right amount or right kind of sports gambling. So one kind of basically in sports gambling, um, friction is helpful to prevent people from behaving in stupid ways, right? Like even the
Yeah.
mere act of like, I was in Vegas a couple years ago, right? And there was, I had a model, there was some game that was like, okay, this is just barely a bet, right? You probably have a 1% ROI. I might bet $1,000 in that game, right? But I was in Vegas and I don't have all my apps set up. They have separate apps in Nevada, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm staying at the
Yeah.
Wynn. I could go down to the casino and place this bet. I have the cash on me, right?
Yeah.
But like, I just feel lazy, right? I'm not gonna, it's not worth the $10 in expected value to like go spend 15
I'm in my
minutes doing this.
bathrobe. This hotel room
Yeah.
is nice. I don't want to go down there. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you had like physical look, like in the UK, you go, there's like a Ladbrokes on every corner or whatever, but like that creates some degree of friction where there can be like know your customer laws. If you seem like you're out of sorts, and they can probably refuse your action and things like that, right? But like the frictionlessness of it is great for the profitability of the betting sites, but I don't know, to have a couple of states where you can bet legally, and then some other ways where it's kind of a gray market and people turn the other cheek. I mean, I'm not sure that was like the worst equilibrium in the world. I definitely don't want like the feds coming after like people who are trying to win um sports betting like the legitimate way, right? And I think probably you should
Yeah.
have like a legal regime in some states, but yeah, having more friction. Maybe you need to have a waiting period between when you deposit and when you're allowed to bet. One big thing that I think that makes the markets less robust is that the fact that one person can literally bet tens of thousands of times more than the other person. They're called stake factors. Some states like Massachusetts and New York are now investigating this, but like the traditional paradigm for bookmaking is that you have some nerd in the back room of a boiler room, or maybe it's an old guy smoking a cigar, right? And he looks at, here are the NFL games for next week, and I'm just going to kind of like put my finger in the wind and pick a line based on some combination of probably a simple power computer ranking and then their general knowledge of how the public tends to bet, right? And those lines are fairly good, but probably beatable. Some sharp people bet those lines right away. By the way, when I was betting a league, bets of as small as like $550 or $1,000 could move the market on some sites, right?
Yeah.
If they,
I know you've written this. Yeah.
yeah, it was surprising to me where like, and if you were betting like one of the first games to go up, then like me sitting here on my computer, like I am now, with a model that might have a 1 or 2% ROI. I'm not Billy Walters, one of these super sharp Haralabos or one of these super sharp people, right? But just the fact that it seemed like I was trying to win and they had very little other feedback from sharp bettors, and that I did know when the lines went up and to bet them early, like that can cause an entire line to change, because like that's the process of bookmaking where you say, okay, it's very Bayesian. We're going to update our process, make our line sharper and sharper, because most of the recreational action comes in just before tip-off, just before kickoff. It's for a much higher volume. You increase the limits, and so you have a win-win relationship where I give this sports book smart information. I make what's frankly probably at best a fairly small expected value in terms of profit, right? And they get to make their line sharper for the degenerate action or the recreational action that comes in later on. And different books, DraftKings in particular has kind of proudly said, yeah, we don't want winning bettors. I mean, that's like not how bookmaking is supposed to work, right? And in fact, they're kind of free riding off of, ironically, kind of like the offshore sites where some of the American sports books are. Circa is one that's in Nevada and Colorado, maybe not many other states. They're trying to do things the right way, quote unquote. They'll take pretty much anybody's action. But yeah, DraftKings and the other big retail books are in some ways kind of like leeching off um, the real bookmakers and the real sharp bettors who are doing bookmaking the old fashioned way, right? Because if you don't have any basis for your line, then it's very beatable unless you just say, okay, we're not going to let anybody named Nate bet these lines, right? They probably know a lot about basketball, right? And you have a whole other kind of game within a game where if you are a degenerate sports bettor, ironically, then your account becomes worth a lot to a sharp sports bettor. One reason why people like Haralabos might play poker, he's a good poker player, but also he's networking with people who might be degenerate sports bettors. And if you have an account that is flagged as a VIP account, a whale account, you can basically bet infinity dollars on almost anything you want. Now, the books are smart. They are very aware that like whale VIP accounts can be captured by sharp bettors. And so, I've had friends who were being shipped cases of wine and given free tickets to anywhere they want, right? To any, at least regular season sporting event, pretty much. And they figured out, okay, now I'm going to have some like sharp people advise me on how to bet. And within a year, they're restricted, limited severely, right? So they can catch up to this eventually, but it creates a whole, here's the thing, right? You learn that like, especially in the regular season, NBA, like the betting becomes not really about the basketball. Playoffs are different. Playoff basketball is challenging to handicap for different reasons, but like that's more like who do I think the better team is, and is this a fair line? But like in the regular season, it's more about kind of psychologizing what is the market thinking versus what my model says.
Yeah.
What can I infer about injuries? What can I infer about like the effort level from day to day? By the way, some of this stuff was detectable. I mean, of all the teams mentioned in the indictment, I'm not surprised that the Lakers were mentioned. LeBron James is not accused of anything. I don't think he did anything, right? But like
Yeah.
that was a case where like, because LeBron would make a delta of like 6 points in the line, you could infer pretty well from the line whether LeBron was expected to play that night. Every now and then,
Yeah.
it wasn't reliable, right? Every now and then, there were surprises. I mean, there can be bad information. There can be like these cascades where like bettors believe that there's sharp information priced in, and then it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling paradox, right? But for the most part, when I was trying to infer what the inside information was, those bets tended to do well. When I'm like, how can I not bet the Lakers at 2-1 at home, right? If there's any chance LeBron plays, it's a great line. It's not that bad if he doesn't play. Those bets lost money.
So how would you change the overall regime then? Like, is it fine? It's just all going to go offshore anyway? Should we just not allow app betting? Would that help? I mean, because you kind of have two different things here to me from like a moral perspective. One is, well, you're going to mess up. Your guys are still going to be incentivized on these teams or figures to uh, create these scandals. But then number two is, well, this isn't really fair. Like sharps get limited. We're ruining young men's lives. All of that. I mean, so those are kind of two competing things. And full disclosure, from my standpoint, probably 1 or 2% of my income, I would say, comes from gambling sponsorships. Not very much. Probably indirectly, gamblers are pretty interested in my work. So, but I don't consider that to be a major conflict of interest. But what do you think? What is the things that should be implemented here to just would both limit these scandals and also just be better or fair for society, as someone who does actually enjoy doing this stuff?
Yeah, look, the lowest hanging fruit is probably restricting the number of player prop bets, right? I mean, there are various issues with these players like Jalen Brunson have spoken about how much abuse they take from fans who are betting these prop bets and like, Jalen, why'd you only score 23 points tonight? I had you at, over 24 and a half. And at least he's a star player, but like, maybe the player prop bet should be restricted only to basically all-star type players. I mean, you can even bet prop bets for college kids who are making literally nothing from what they're playing, right? That's kind of, I think, some of the lower hanging fruit. I mean, I think there's also, I think limiting the amount of delta in the stake factors. I'm speaking in tongues here. What that means is like there should be a limit in the spread in how much different people are allowed to bet, right? If you want to have a VIP tier, we can bet 2x, and you want to have a sharp tier where you can bet 0.5x, right? But like, the whole reason why some people can bet $100,000 on Terry Rozier under rebounds is because they're restricting. I guarantee you, Nate, if you or I wanted to bet some of these obscure prop lines and could get down infinite money, we could crush them, but we would be restricted very quickly.
Yeah.
And so that allows the casinos to offer a bunch of bets that like are not quite rigged games, but like are beatable games if you know how to beat them, and like, but they just prevent winners from playing. So those are the couple of things, right? Is limit stake factors, restrict maybe not entirely player props, right? One other idea I've had is like you can in baseball, I don't really bet baseball, but in baseball, there's a tradition where you can make your bet conditional on the starting pitcher starting.
Yeah.
Now they try to opt you into not doing that because they lose money if the bet is canceled. But like I should be able to bet maybe as a default, like, okay, conditional on Giannis playing, I will take the Bucks minus 5.5. That's kind of like the first tier, I think, kind of like common sense stuff. And yeah, but then you get into like, you know, maybe you need a waiting period where I can deposit money and then I can like bet 24 hours later with that money. I mean, even as like a somewhat sharp bettor, I can tell you that like the impulse purchases are usually bad, right? Like, oh, I'm watching a game on TV and like, oh, I really want to bet the Knicks at plus 200. Let me deposit instantly my FanDuel account. I mean, having a little bit more friction there might help potentially.
I've thought that just you have to some way of proving relative financial health if you're should be required, you know, to where you don't have people racking up, you know, $500,000 in gambling debts on, you know, like DraftKings or something like that, just on their credit card. I would have to get more into exactly how you could do that, but yeah, like you said, just a little bit more friction so that you just aren't like pissing away your money, like, you know, go on a losing streak, try to get it back, all those classic behaviors.
Yeah, I know it is surprisingly easy because I don't really play online poker very much anymore, but I have at various times. I mean, my living from it, you know, I'm getting old here, so like back in the mid 2000s, and there there were barriers to getting your money in with crypto. Ironically, you know, with crypto type stuff, then like it requires a little bit of knowledge to figure out how to get crypto from one place to another that would deter some degree of casual fan, right? Which is kind of the way that most kind of offshore gray market gambling is funded. But like, yeah, if you know, you can, I mean, I got back from Mexico last night and like, you know, with NFL lines, I'm trying to bet as early as I'm back on US soil because in general, the earlier you bet, the sharper the lines, right? So like, you know, I'm like, you know, my Delta flight lands and I'm like pulling up the different apps and like saying, I really got to bet this Bengals Bears game and things like that. And like, but it's surprising if, you know, I had plenty of money in my accounts. If you didn't have money in your account, then you can like, you know, from the tarmac, you link your bank account to DraftKings or FanDuel and deposit thousands of dollars instantly. And like just those, I don't know, right? You know, I'm never going to, I think, rely on sports betting for serious income. I want to protect the sharp bettors. I think the sharp bettors kind of keep the sports books honest. That's kind of what makes sports gambling intellectually interesting, right? But yeah, it's too easy to lose too much money too quickly. I would like to see kind of like almost just like as a political matter for the league and the sports books to recognize that we need to place some restrictions on this to like protect the players, because otherwise you're going to have a backlash. I mean, we are, if you look historically, gambling in general is always kind of in this liminal zone where people are, no one thinks it's the worst sin compared to other things. Nobody really claims it's fantastic for society either, but we are at like a high watermark in the United States in terms of tolerance for gambling. And I'm a guy who, if you build models, you tend to be a bigger believer in mean reversion than following the trend, right? If I had to bet at like an interval of 10 years from now, I would think society would probably be less tolerant of gambling. Now you might be in a regime where everything is AI and crypto and it's all degenerate, you know, dystopian world anyway, which might be a little bit different. But like given kind of normal political dynamics, you might predict that there would be a backlash against this kind of thing. And you know, there's kind of, you know, both, you know, the right is not as religious as it once was. You could have like a kind of a religious family values objection. You can have an objection from the left about how it tends to hurt high or low income people, vulnerable people. I think it's a little bit hypocritical because like sports betting probably hits a better, quote unquote, better socioeconomic demographic than like the lottery or than slot machines, right? Like in general.
Yeah, or any other vice, alcohol, or it's many of the other things that we tolerate, right? Like no one is crapping on LeBron James for doing an ad for Hennessy. I would
Right.
argue that alcohol is a far greater net negative for society than sports betting is, but people really like alcohol, and a lot of people enjoy it responsibly, and so it's legal. And we tried to make it illegal, and it didn't work out too well historically. So
And look,
that's kind of my feeling on sports betting.
people enjoy gambling to some extent. I mean, there are, if you look at like the whole Bill Simmons experience, right? Like Bill can obviously afford to gamble many times over. But he enjoys
Yes.
it is an enjoyable experience for for some fans, right? When you
Yeah,
go to like
it makes. I mean, the reason we want to watch sports is because you care about the outcome. So this is a way to, especially for your bullshit Blazers Bulls game in 2023. It's a way to actually make someone care about it. The only problem then is when the players don't. That's that's what or the
look,
organization doesn't.
there is nothing. I mean, and I'm also, I should say, an advisor to Polymarket, which is a prediction market. They do sports betting along with other things. And like, yeah, the whole notion that like actually betting is like a tax on bullshit, right? Like, I love the fact that like in sports, if I have a bad idea or a good idea, ultimately it comes down to the rather tangible question of like, which team's going to win tonight, right? Or which team's going to win the
Yeah.
NBA title? How many points is this player going to
Yeah.
score, right? Tangible
It's becoming
predictions and that.
vanishingly less common in our society that you actually have an objective truth of how things turned out that you can refer to. Yeah, I
So
love
yeah,
sports.
as an epistemological trend, I like the fact that there's accountability in the form of sports betting, but look, even everybody has an interest in inside information not leaking. The sharp bettors, the dumb bettors, the sports books, the league, everybody has an interest in that at the very least. Um, the fact that the league seems not as diligent about this as they could be, and I'm sure they'll be forced to reform for their own good some of this stuff. But 95% of the stuff they could do to like make this stuff less likely would also improve the integrity of the league for everything from casual fans to intense NBA fans who don't care about gambling one way or another.
All right, well, we need to wrap it here. There's so much more we could have gotten into, but I know your time is precious, so thank you for coming on. You got anything? What do you got planned sports wise for Silver Bulletin in the coming months?
So we just released a couple weeks ago an NFL model called Elway. Inspired by that, I'm working on a college basketball model called Cooper. Now, all these things are like backronyms. COOPER is like, I think the R is regression or a C. I don't know what. But it's Cooper Flag or Cynthia Cooper. One thing we learned in the NFL is that you're dealing with a much smaller sample size than in the NBA. So you really have to like extract signals from the game that are not just the final score, right?
Yeah.
Yardage, efficiency, first downs, given how the game is played today, indications of the pass rush and pass protection are really important, for example. So when it see how that applies to college basketball, maybe control for shooting luck and things like that. Right now, all the power rankings just use the final score, right? So there's like lots of other four factors type of data. So we're looking at that, and then we will turn to the NBA with Raptor 2.0. I have a very smart assistant I hired named Joseph George, who's done great work in analytics. So we're going to kind of try to rebuild Raptor, maybe not quite from scratch, but I think we have, the last time I built this NBA metric was like 5 or 6 years ago now, right?
Yeah.
One thing I've become clear on is that like the lens should really be prediction. Some of these systems try to like double as a way to like, let's kind of reward teams for like how they played in NCAA basketball. It's important because you have a ultimately subjective set of decisions made by the seating committee, right? The more I've done,
Yeah.
like I want to give you the model that I would use to place bets, right? That paradigm is a little clear. I'm not so concerned about being like politically correct about, oh yeah, the whatever, the Giants had a big comeback win yesterday. That's great, right? Well, maybe the underlying metrics say they got lucky to win that game, right? And they did against a bad team, a bad defense at home under favorable conditions. So maybe the rating goes down. So, like, yeah, focusing more on prediction, in the NBA, I think, one flaw with Raptor 1.0 was that it was a little bit fuzzy about what was skill and what was luck exactly, right? Like, clearly, for example, opponent free throw percentage is 95% luck. I could tell you the
Yeah.
5% that's not luck, right? Like, there are some defenders like Draymond Green that are smart about whom they foul, believe it or not, but it's 95% luck. Opponent three-point shooting might be 80% luck. And so having like a clear, rebounding is a great area. I'm actually one of the analytics dorks who thinks like rebounding's gotten a little bit underrated, if anything, but like clearly a lot of
Everyone, yeah, I mean, I think that's actually becoming pretty common now. Like we've seen, it was definitely 5 years ago. It was really underrated. I think now teams are kind of getting that.
But there's a lot of arbitrariness in who grabs particular rebounds. So we have a good basis for Raptor, but kind of rebuilding it with some of the stuff we discovered from other leagues about like how much signal can you extract out of a game. Oh, by the way, I mean, I guess this is obvious too, but like, you know, every effort that you make to account for injuries, not just for forecasting games. So like a lot of the reason why we had trouble in the playoffs is because like we would naively kind of assume that like, okay, well, here's a team in the regular season. Like if you adjust for the fact who's actually playing in the regular season and that flows into your ELO rating or whatever else, right? It's more work, but like that's very, very, very important, right? Adjusting for I mean, in our NFL rating is like one small edge that we pick up, right? Is that we actually track which teams were injured in the past, who the starting quarterbacks were. So like a team like, I know you're a Chicago guy, right? A team like the Bears, for example,
Oh
we
God,
think
don't associate me with that sorry ass franchise.
But whatever, they have a winning record. But like our model does not like the Bears because like they've played a bunch of backup quarterbacks because like the starter was injured, Jaden Daniels, whatever, right? And so like, or Lamar Jackson was injured when they played the Ravens last week, right? So like you look at their schedule, it's like, oh, it's not half bad. Well, if you adjust for that, then they played actually a very soft schedule. When they haven't played a soft team like the Lions, they got like blown out, for example. So like, yeah, I'm looking forward to like having spent time on a couple of different sports now, extrapolating lessons from one league to another. I hope that Raptor 2.0 is ready. The player ratings mid-season, the team ratings maybe 2/3 of the way into the season. Fortunately, Nate, the NBA season is really fucking long, right? And so like, like October is still going to be happening in March, April, June. But we are eagerly awaiting having more NBA coverage for our readers.
All right, well, Godspeed on that. I've definitely been focusing on getting my own stat site going. I know it is not the easiest thing in the world to do, so I admire that you've done this a number of times. It's a lot of work, and certainly subscribe to Silver Bulletin is just one of the absolute essential things on the internet that you have to be reading. And really appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
I appreciate it, man. Talk to you soon.